Anyway, on that awkward note, we'll begin. Woo! Wow, somebody's awake. Right, nice to meet you all. Nice to be in lovely Copenhagen with the non-typical weather, as everyone's been talking about. My name's Paul Nolan, if you haven't heard of me before. I have been an engineer, a sound designer, a composer, an educator, an English idiot, whatever you want to call me, for the best part of the last 2 decades. I have worked with quite a lot of very, very good producers and artists over my years. I've been very fortunate where that's concerned. Work with the likes of Sasha, JunkieXL, Jeff Rona, amazing American film score composer who's worked with Ridley Scott amongst other people, Arthur Baker, the Martinez Brothers, Thievery Corporation. The list thankfully goes on because I need to keep a roof over my head. And at the moment, I am actually deciding to try and be an artist myself, which time will remain to be seen as to whether or not that's a good decision or not. However, things have gotten off to a good start because my first sort of main release as an artist on 2019 is coming on the 15th, and it is being released on John Digweed's label on Bedrock. And this is one of the tracks from the EP. So, rather than do what I normally do on these production masterclasses, which is I normally tear down everybody else's tracks and they all curse me because I've given all of their secrets away. Yeah, basically half the drum code roster, in other words. I am now going to break down, quite novelly, one of my own tracks. About time too, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little section of the track, and then from there, I'll go into a breakdown of the actual track, how I've made it, the ethos behind it, and in fact, I'll tell a little bit of a story as to what the meaning of the track actually is, and we'll get into it from there. So I'm just going to play it from here. Get the idea, like, really, decent sort of peak time club banger. And yeah, basically what I wanted to do with this track, I wanted to try and get several things across. I'm really bored of techno right now, like super bored of just kick drums and big reverbs and donks underneath everything. I'm done. Like, I'm really done with the last 3 years. As fun as the drum code thing has been, I am so over it. With all due respect to everyone who's still doing it. So I wanted to do something that has that kind of like main room club vibe, and also just bring a little bit of, well, MDMA to it. I don't know like how to explain it, which is a bit rich coming from me considering I've never taken ecstasy in my life, but that's another conversation for another time. But with this track, the track is called Form Constants, and that obviously is a bit of a weird title for a track, and I'll tell you why. It's a bit of a personal story behind it. I have had, over the last couple of years, some really, really beautiful and very peak experiences in my life. Thanks in part to working with various types of psychedelics. And it's been a really, really important part of my life, and it's really, really helped me grow as an individual. And there's an amazing book about how electronic music ties into psychedelic experience, and it's called Inner Sound. And it is essentially a guide for electronic music producers as to how to create psychedelic states using the combination of audio and visual stimulation. So, in short, it's a book on how to get people to trip their tits off to your music, which, you know, who doesn't want that, right? So, what a form constant is that there's actually imagery we all share when we are under the influence of these psychotropic substances. And in fact, you can get there using your own breath. You can get there via many different means without the use of, you know, chemicals or, you know, plant medicines, etc. But we all share these visions, and they are what are known as form constants. So these are actually like, you know, the geometric patterns and stuff you see when, and this is some nodding in the room going, yeah, remember them. Yeah, they were great last night. In fact, I'm seeing them right now. Anyway, if the whole idea was to actually bring that into a track, like, well, what would that sound like? You know, what's the sound of me falling down the hole when I'm, you know, tripping my balls off on mushrooms, for want of a better expression? And this is it. So basically, the whole production of the track was based on this concept. So all of the sounds were very highly deliberately created for those types of experiences. And again, if you know anything about me and my sort of background, you know, I'm an old prog boy. As I said, I've worked with Sasha and, you know, people like that who try and put that storytelling and put that little bit of meaning into dance music. And one of the things, again, I mentioned before about being bored of what's going on with the whole techno thing at the minute. Actually, musically and technically, it's fantastic music. I just find it a little bit devoid of a deeper meaning. Like, what stories are we trying to tell here? You know, what are we trying to do to help people grow through these experiences? I can tell you from my background and my beginnings, I started going to Cream in like 97, 98. And that effectively was like a weekly religious experience of actual personal growth through music and collective growth through music. And in recent years, me and a couple of friends of mine, we all co-founded a record label called Chapter 24 Records. And the tagline of that label is Stories in Sound. And what we've been trying to do for the past 3 or 4 years is find artists, and with ourselves as producers, and also with parties and artwork and various other elements that we're into, we've tried to tell stories, bring a deeper philosophical, psychological, or humanistic or spiritual meaning to our music. And again, this is very much an example of me trying to do this, but kind of dressed up as a peak time club banger, which, you know, it's cool. So the main emphasis of the whole track is, I've got the main synths here, which I'll play, which are these like really, really interesting harps. And if I just play them in isolation for a second. So, yeah, the whole thing that's going on here is that there are 3 layers, and we're going to concentrate on one of them because they are effectively versions of themselves. But as you can see, not an insignificant amount of automation going on here. And this is kind of part of the rule where that looks incredibly complex, and to a degree it is, but actually when you break the actual amount of tracks down in the entire production, there's actually only 18 tracks. Like, it's actually a super simple thing. I mean, you see a lot of producers, you know, they're like 50 or 100 tracks. And I try to avoid that where possible. I try to keep things, despite how that looks, I try to keep things as simple as possible. Because it's not so much the amount of layering you do, it's getting the right sound in the first place, and then being able to leverage those sounds with automation and movement through the track. And then, obviously, as a final thing, in fact, the way I layered this was one of the last things I've ever done. I've got a question already. Yeah, go on.
Can we ask?
Yes, of course.
But you didn't create it in the box, right? You made it for the workshop now, or is that?
No, this is entirely in the box.
Also, you created it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I literally own no hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely 100% in the box.
Cool.
He says with relief. In fact, I recently had, tell a lie, the other track on the EP, which is called Warrior, has a synth line in it, which was from a Korg Minilog. And it was the only thing I used the Korg Minilog for, and I sold it a few weeks ago. So I was like, I could just do the same thing on a synth, on a plugin, that's fine. So yeah, so basically to go into the actual channel strip itself, it's Wavetable in Live 10, which actually I absolutely love. I think it's fantastic. The good news is when Live 10.1 finally drops, when it's not in beta, it will have finally the ability to load your own wavetables. And I've been experimenting with it on the beta for a while, and it's brilliant. The fact you can take any file, any audio file, and just drop it into the window, and it'll turn it into a wavetable for you. It's phenomenal. So, to be honest, this is like a kind of an adapted preset that I found in Wavetable within Live 10, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was called. But what I've done is I've manipulated the preset in quite a few ways. So the actual main preset itself is pretty standard, and then I've added in things like the echo here as well, which is an amazing new effect, a little bit of EQ. And then obviously I've brought up this auto filter as well, and then obviously a lot of the parameters on the actual effects and stuff here themselves, and things like the wavetable positions and stuff like that as well. So the whole idea, if I bring this up and we just look at this in a bit more detail, if we just bring that up a little bit, you can actually see what we're doing here, and I'm using a couple. Like a sort of a noise-based oscillator here, and then an octaphase. And then if I play this, you can just see the movement. Now there's a lot more going on with, you can hear like reverbs and weird little kind of shards of things going off, and we'll go into the sends and returns, which they're based in a moment. So the whole idea was to attempt to manipulate the filters and also manipulate things like the envelopes as well. So you can start with like a very, very, very clipped, very stabby, plucky type sound, and then to have it really open out as the track goes on. And again, because the arpeggio that you've seen on the screen there with the MIDI, which I actually generated with the arpeggiator here, but moved it off into another channel and then was able to record the raw MIDI in. It allows then for that really trippy, hypnotic, kind of psychedelic element. And from here, it was just a case of, as you can see, the filter moving up and down. And again, it's mostly this filter 1 here that you've got. Filter 2 kind of stays a little bit static because it changes the tone quite dramatically. If I was to, I'm playing just the one layer here. If I was to move filter 2, it starts to get even more clicky. So I tend to just keep that in position there. And then a lot of it was down to things like manipulating the ADSR on the amp here. Take it from there, but then I could open out, I mean, you can see the automation sort of blanking off here. There's a lot going on with the amp decay. There's a lot of sends going on here. There's like 3 or 4 sends. And then also, there's a sub-oscillator. So one of the things you probably can't see very well at the moment, let me just open that up again, is you actually have here on the left-hand side, you have a sub-oscillator. And where a lot of those higher notes come from is actually me manipulating that to drop the sub into a higher octave or raise it into a higher octave. Then it's about the layering. And then being able to use the onboard reverb. At the beginning of the track, it starts really floaty because it's underneath this massive reverb. You can almost hear it kind of like fade in and become more sharp as it... But then I've got a second layer. Now the second layer is the exact same sound, but you'll notice this pitch plugin here on the left-hand side. And then the only difference there is that if you look at the main sound here, this is 1 octave up. And then this one is at like the root note, if you will. So if I play that on its own, see it's obviously got a lower tone. So the combination of the two of them together in octaves works really, really well. And then adding in this third layer, which is actually 2 octaves up here on the pitch plugin. So other than that, I have tweaked nothing of these layers. So essentially the layer that you've just seen is exactly the same thing, but just playing at higher notes. Yes?
How differently are they EQ'd?
Well, they're slightly differently EQ'd in that you can see there's a bit more clearance at the top. So the top layer, if I play that on its own, it inherently has a bit of a higher sound. And in fact, the EQ is exactly the same. I'm actually just relying on the actual native sounds themselves. So actually, yeah, the EQ is exactly the same. But what I will have done in the mixdown, because this brings into conversation my mixdown kind of workflow, if you will, I don't mix the tracks down in Ableton. What I do from here when a track is like finished is I'll stem everything out and then put it into Logic, and then I'll actually mix the track down in Logic with some, very high-powered sort of mix plugins. This isn't my main rig. I have a 27-inch iMac at home, 5K iMac, and very, very powerful. And what I like to do, it gives me separation of process. So what that means is I'm only focusing on what the track needs to say at this point, both sound design-wise and structurally. So I'm obviously blending and making sure things fit, but I'm not in mixdown mode because that's a totally different thought process. So what I like to do, if you actually look up anything that I do, because my training company, Make a Transition, one of our really, really successful courses has actually been about a workflow system where you separate everything into separate streams. So that means right down to the beginning inception of a track like this, there's a composition phase. That's where that arpeggio you've just seen on the screen, that's where that came from. That came from a session that I do on a regular basis where I do nothing but sound design. I don't actually care about writing tracks at that point, but the ideas that I can come up with in a sound design session then become the tracks. But then the mixdown process is totally separate. So I'm literally leaving it for a few days and then dropping it in. So hopefully that answers your question. So yeah, so from there, it is literally just about manipulating the layers. And it's also about manipulating the musicality itself. So if we were to just drop out of the MIDI here, or out of the automation mode, what you'll see is that we've got 2 different colors on the MIDI clips. Now, the reason for that, if I was to just select both of them, is because actually they run in opposite directions. So at the beginning, if we listen to the main sound, the arps you can see actually run upwards. flip without warning and then they start cascading downwards. Then later on, towards the peak of the track, they start to run upwards again. So it's not just about manipulation of layers, it's about manipulation of the musicality. Yes, mate?
Have you a trick to flipping the arpeggiating style?
Absolutely. So over here in the notes section, gentleman's just asked how you can flip the MIDI. What you can do here, you can press any one of these two buttons here, Rev for reversing the MIDI, or you can hit Invert. Invert flips it upside down. So I could have really blagged that, couldn't I? And said, yeah, I sat there for hours and I redid it all and, you know, look how hard I worked. Nah, it's a little button there. I'm a lazy fucker, I don't care. So yeah, I mean, actually that's a really cool thing for composition, where if you come up with a line or a riff or an arpeggio like this, play around with it. Like play around with reversing it, inverting it. And again, if you think about it, if you hit reverse, then invert, you've got like 3 or 4 different variations. So it starts to allow your composition to become a lot more complex without having to do a lot of extra work. So that's quite a cool thing to do. And I like working this way as well, where I can actually get hold of the raw MIDI, so I can then, you know, manipulate things up and down. Like what was spat out of the arpeggiator that you've just seen here, if I move back to there, is not necessarily what that is. It would have been a basic kind of version of this, and then I've worked with the raw MIDI to kind of, you know, get it into a position where I quite like the feel and the vibe of it. And again, all that comes down to is me on a keyboard or a push controller just playing chords and seeing what comes out and just loving the feeling and loving the vibe of it, basically. So that's like the main sound of the track, and that was what kind of initially kind of gave me the idea for it. And then it was all about wrapping other elements around it. So again, the greatest sort of existential question of music production in the dance music space is, you know, what came first, the drums or the music? It's like, you know, chicken and egg, right? So for me, the answer to that question is kind of like variable. What I mean by that is it depends upon what you want to have as the dominant element in your track. So if you're looking to create something emotional with musicality and something with, you know, absolute, you know, emotion at the front of it, then start with the musical elements. And my rule has always been, my tracks need to work as a piece of music that stand on their own, meaning that I could remove the kick drum, I could remove the boots and cats, if you will, and it works as like an ambient piece of music without any drums in at all. You could still sit there and quite enjoy it for 8.5, 9 minutes. You don't actually need the drums to have the experience of the music. And in fact, on the dance floor, the drums become a delivery system for the emotional and musical elements and the story that you're trying to tell. Now, if you're trying to, you know, make something a bit more drum-led and a bit more techno, if you will, then drums first. In fact, the drums are the music in certain genres like tribal stuff. I was always a big fan of like a lot of the West Coast house movement that happened at around the turn of the millennium. People like H Foundation, Hippie and Halo, you know, Onions, Joski, those types of people who actually, if you listen to the way they program percussion the way I program riffs. So again, drums first if you're looking to make something that's very rhythmically dominated. Music first if you're looking to do something more musical and more emotional. So this is what I did here, and then it was about, right, well, let's find things that really underpin this. So for me, it was all about trying to find a bass that would work quite well. And again, just to kind of underpin the whole thing, and what I'll do here, I'll just play a kick drum underneath this as well, just so you get an impression of it. I'm a big lover of UHI synths. So this is where we start breaking out into third-party stuff. I'm a big, big fan of this. Repro 1, if you guys haven't already heard of it, this is killer. Right out the box, absolutely just a murderous synth. Incredible, absolutely blew my head off in the last year or so, and I use it on everything, especially for low end. It is an SH101 Oh, sorry, no, it's a Pro 1 emulation. And you can go geeky with it, because if I go into tweaks, you can change the filter circuitry, you can change, you know, oscillator models, and also as well now it comes in a package called Repro. So you get Repro 1, Pro 1, and then you also get Repro 5, which is a Prophet 5. And the Prophet 5 is just as killer as this. But everything he do is just incredible. They make Diva, Zebra, whatever you want to call it, and a number of other amazing plugins. So yeah, I use this as kind of like, again, an adapted preset, but again, just rounded this off a little bit. And you can see it's got its own onboard effects. The only one I'm using here is this sonic conditioner, which just adds a bit of transient and a bit of, if you will, a bit of shine to the sound. And then everything else is literally, you can see it's just a bit of an auto filter. And again, the little trick that I do is I use the auto filter in Ableton on various circuits. So I'll use things like this, MS2 mode. Now MS2 is actually, this is emulating now the filter circuit from a Korg MS-20. So it's very clever. All the other filter circuits are doing that as well. I can't remember what the other ones are, but I know for a fact PRD is actually a Moog emulation. So it's very clever what they've done, where, you know, a lot of plugin developers, they'll, you know, oh, this is SSL or Neve or API for mixdown purposes. What Ableton have done here is say, well, actually, you know, you want to be able to drive a synth filter, because that's one of the constituent things that give these synths their sound. So I use that a lot. Sometimes I'll add a bit of drive here, like 3 dB, and you'll hear the immediate difference. That just really jumps out if I turn that off. It just becomes way more forward. For the purposes of this track, I didn't really need it because it was sitting quite nicely. And then what it was all about was obviously underpinning with a more stabby sound, because the track is in G, or underpinning the synths with this kind of more plodding sort of bass line. And then later on, it was about bringing more musicality and a more emotional payoff even in these elements. So what I'm trying to do here is just, again, provide a moment of surprise where you've been used to things being held at the root note for nearly 5 minutes. Then it starts to duck and dive and move up and down, and then actually you've probably all felt that in the club when the sub bass comes in and then it goes down. It's like, whoa. Yeah, you feel that in your guts, you know? And that's kind of what I was going for here. And then underpinning that on the bass was very much one of my favourite synths. And again, you can see in a longer fashion, it completely mirrors. If I just move those two together, you can see it completely mirrors, well, pretty much always. Now, the interesting thing is here, there is what's known as a counterpoint here musically. You'll notice the second note, as the Repro 1 goes up, this sub bass goes down. But what they do is that they head up and down to the same note, just an octave away. And that can provide a really pleasing emotional moment, which you'll hear right now. Because I have this sub bass underneath everything. And I have an S49 complete control back in my home studio, and I love this thing. This thing is dangerous. your man over there was talking about not having any hardware. This is one of the reasons why. Because this thing, Monarch from Native, will bury most hardware for the low end. And I say that with all confidence. One of the reasons why I've gone 100% in the box is A, I travel a lot. B, I don't have a lot of space in my home studio. And C, quite frankly, I think the gap between hardware and software has never been shorter. To the point where, to be honest, the other perspective I like to bring to it is D. Nobody on the dance floor gives a shit. Does it sound good? Yeah, I like it. Great. You ever met anyone at a rave who goes, I'm not dancing to that track, it's been made with a plugin? And frankly, if you meet someone like that, not the type of person you want to go to the rave with, quite frankly. That's me in the corner. Going, he used kick number 11 out of that Vengeance pack, lazy bastard. Anyway, the one geek in the corner laughed. Go on.
But then in Logic, you use
Yep.
like transformer plugins or distortion plugins to do like more harmonics?
Well, for mixdown, you mean?
Yeah, like to get more analog sound afterwards in Logic? Or?
Yes. So what I will use in Logic for the mixdown is I'm a very big user of Slate Digital. So they do amazing console emulations. So things like Neve VR Legend, SSL console emulation, I've been using them now, was it 2019 now? I've been using them for 7 years now. And phenomenal plugins. And on a really, actually it's the only subscription model I would actually recommend because it's good value for money and they're really the only company who are like constantly updating with new modules. Like they've just brought a suite of like classic gate emulations out in the last week. They've just put a new reverb out a few weeks before. A couple of months before that, they put new preamps in and vocal pre's and all sorts of stuff. And they're always integrating more stuff into it. Outside of having stupid money for a UAD system, I would honestly recommend Slate because again, it's all in the box. It runs now off the online version of iLok, so you don't even need a USB for it, a USB key. Absolutely phenomenal. The reason why I use them in Logic during the mixdown as a separate process is because I'm not using all of my CPU to run the MIDI in the session. You can probably see, I mean, my CPU here on my laptop is running at 40%, sat here, doing nothing. So I get to reclaim all of that CPU to devote to the mixdown. And it's amazing how many people deny themselves the opportunity to mix their tracks down to an even higher level by just kind of going, no, I'll just mix down as I go, or I'll just slap an ozone preset on the master and think it's mastering when it's not, you know? And in fact, on MYT, I do an online course which is called Mixdown Mastery, and you actually get to see my mixdown process from beginning to end. I think there's 3 different tracks that in fact, you actually see the mixdown of this track in the course. And a couple of other people, because I do mixdowns for professional clients and stuff like that as well. So it's well worth doing it that way. It really, really is. You're going to run stems out if you've signed a record for remixes and the label anyway. So why not? If you were going to run stems out to have your tracks mixed down by somebody else, you may as well do it that way, being completely honest with you. So Monarch is incredible for subs. And if I was to just play that on its own for a second. You know, it's got that kind of moogie kind of vibe to it, which I love. Very similar look to the Model D. And then just a little bit of white noise, little tiny bit of detuning here, just to kind of give it a slightly sort of Reese type sound. But yeah, great to have that with the complete control because I love just having the hands-on control. And if I go back into the automation here, I mean, actually there's nothing on this. But what you'll see through the rest of it is that, you know, I do like to do quite a lot of hands-on automation. In fact, here is a big example. So we'll move on into the drums now. And if I just play the drums in isolation, you'll get an idea of where I'm going. And again, I'm a big user of the push controller. I don't have it with me here, but because Ryanair. But you know, I'll play a section for the drums now. Another question, yeah, go on, mate.
The Repro one,
Mm-hmm.
does it sit above the kick or
Yeah, it sits kind of alongside it. If we have a little look at the EQ, you can see I'm running like 50 hertz off. So that is more to do with getting the sub bass to sit underneath it. And then what I tend to do is I'll have the sub bass as like the lowest element and then sit the kick on top of the sub bass, if you will, by rolling off 20, 30 hertz, something like that. And then the obvious thing is to use some side chaining. Now, I've really decisively in recent years moved away from sidechain compression towards a more volume envelope approach. Now, this might make you laugh considering the fact that I'm a prog boy, but what my most used plugin of any, Nicky Romero Kickstart, €9. I spent more on lunch, but brilliant, because it just does exactly what you need it to do right out of the box with absolutely no complication whatsoever. It's a phenomenal little plugin. Don't let the fact that it's Nicky Romero put you off, because it's just a very, very clever plugin, very simple. And again, I kind of bounce between this and Xfer Records LFO tool. Have you heard of that? That's kind of like a thing where you can draw your own curves in and you can draw your own sidechain curves in, essentially. So rather than compressing, what this does is just turn volume down. And the only other thing is a mix control. As you can see, I've got it at 60%. So it gives you that push down in volume when the kick hits. But I'm doing it without compression, so things don't get too mashed. And don't get me wrong, I love the sound of a sidechain compression. I'll do that when I want to be particularly aggressive. But most of the time, I'm about creating space and creating dynamics. One of the things you'll hear in the track is how spacious it sounds, considering how much is going on. And that is a very deliberate thing. So with drums, if I just play a section here, nice, solid, groovy, housey, but nice and tough. Just the way I like it, with a nice combination of organic and electronic elements. So on the group itself, I'm using a little bit of glue compression just to really catch some peaks and just massage things down so I don't get any unnecessary clipping. 10 minutes. Okay, cool. And then I use this Supercharger GT Native Instruments plugin. Note, complete lack of compression. You'll note not a lot of compression going on in the track at all. For me, it's about getting the raw materials right. So I use, very similar to what we looked at with the auto filter, I use the saturation and the character in order for it to sit nicely and just to bring that little bit of harmonic. So if I play that again without the supercharger, up a little bit, So that's pretty cool. So drum rack, massive fan of drum rack in Ableton. Reason being, I can pop it open and it demixes everything into individual channels. Yes?
Do you use stylus?
I do, yes. I use that vintage antique of a plugin. But it's still brilliant. It's still phenomenal. I use it mostly for shakers and tambourines. Actually, I've used it on this track. So, yeah, it's just really good, solid drum sounds. Really good kick that, again, I've found in a really great kick pack called the Ultimate Kick Collection. And again, it's just here, I've got a really old Andre Crom sample pack from about 2013, which I've just been using for years. I absolutely love it. And then it's just, these little clicks and hi-hats. The ride is actually from Ableton's own stock stuff, which is really cool. A little kind of end of phrase ride, that's for a clap, that's from an Andre Crom track. And then the open hat is from, and the maraca here, which is the more kind of shakery type sound. I was for a long time a very big user of Machine, but since I've got the Push 2, like the Machine's kind of gone in a corner somewhere, and I only really use the drum synths. But I love the actual library that comes with Machine. So what you'll see is in my left-hand part here, I've actually found the folder on my computer where it is, put it in my places, and now I just use it as like a glorified sample pack that I just put into drum racks. And that's actually one of the better ways of working with it. So yeah, nothing too special going on with the drums, but what you can see here, one of the reasons why I love working with drum rack is obviously the workflow within the Ableton push system, but also the fact that I can see all of my drums natively put in, all in one go. If you've got separate channels, it can sometimes be a little difficult to see where all the different drum elements are. So I can quite happily program grooves this way and see everything in one place. From there, I've got this kind of shaker type sound. I've used white noise in Operator. And all that is just, you can see here, just a 16th note, but it's got a Logic swing, which I've grabbed from the Groove Pool, which is a super nice way of just adding a bit of groove to what is essentially just a piece of white noise. Again, EQ just for the high end, and actually I use Kickstart on this as well, just to add a little bit of extra, dip into the kick, so it's all tightening to the kick. But what's really cool about doing sounds like this, or using sounds like this, is I can use the time function to almost turn it from a shaker into a riser, and then send that off to a reverb, bring it back. I love sounds that change shape through a track and perform more than one function. So again, just very simple, but very, well put together. This is where we go more into sort of more organic territory. And I love Studio Drummer in Kontakt, which you can get as part of the complete package. And I like to be able to take these grooves that you can actually drag and drop from the grooves part of Studio Drummer, and you get these really nice sort of offsets, so it's almost like a real drummer's playing alongside. And that's literally it, little side sticks. But if I play that along with the rest of the track, like bit of groove to things and just adds a little bit of extra detail. Stylus RMX, as was mentioned before, if you haven't seen this plugin before, they really could put this plugin in a museum. It's that old. I mean, like, just screams turn of the millennium, right? But still phenomenal. And I use it mostly for percussion, shakers and hats, and tambourines. So I've got this really nice, just insistent tambourine, which I've actually brought down 2 semitones. That's what it's like normally. So that's kind of my main source for tambourines, shakers if I'm not making them that way. And then I've got this really nice, just more organic sounding shaker that I've picked up along the way, just a nice file that I found. It's just nice and insistent. And then from there, I mean, God, there is a lot to kind of go through, but I'm a bit pushed for time, as I'm being told. There's a few different bits here. I'll go through the center and returns actually. I'm a big user of Eventide plugins, phenomenal plugins, and they often have really good sales. This thing, Black Hole, phenomenal. I use that as like a main reverb. That's why things sound so spacey and so gorgeous. I would well recommend that. I picked that up a while ago for like $49. So they do have, I mean, spring is like a good time for sales. But one of the things I really love is this, the harmonizer. So if we were to just play that with a section, I just want to really get this right. What are we on here? B. Right, okay, B. There you go. So you can hear it just kind of like pitching everything up and making everything a bit weird. And yeah, you've got a couple of different things going on here in some chains. So yeah, you've got this as well, this kind of morph thing going on with an LFO that's mapped to it. That sort of changes the filter from various different modes, bandpass, low pass, high pass, etc. Bit of auto panning to make it kind of pan round the stereo a little bit, just to make it sort of fly over the top a little bit. Obviously a bit of kickstart, and then auto filter on top. Now, the one thing I did want to go into was this. That kind of like, you know, sharp kind of sound you could hear is this. So basically you can hear this is like a kind of a really nice preset that I've got from here, and it's just about bringing that little bit of extra kind of texture, extra bit of, you know, just that little that little kind of final flavor that really brings the track to life. Rest of it is just very simple. Big reverb, using an echo just to kind of again throw things like bass notes, etc., to make them more complex. The final thing I will show you, because I'm being pulled off stage, is this, the crystallizer from Sound Toys. I'm a big Sound Toys user as well. So what's happening there is that the signal going into the synth, and then they're actually being brought up. They're being pitched up within, it's like a granular delay, basically pitched up by an octave from there. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, it's quite a simple track, but there's actually quite a lot of like depth to the programming and the sound design. So I'm happy to, you know, go into further teardowns with you guys later on and ask any more questions. I'm going to be hanging around here for the rest of the day. So if there's not any more final questions, and I've not bored you to tears in the meantime by talking about my own track. Anyone final questions? Going once, going twice? Sold to the man who asked 25 questions at the beginning. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.